When someone else hurts you, it's easy to blame them. But who do we blame when there's nobody obvious to pin it on? Natural disasters, we tend to blame God. Interesting to me that insurance companies refer to tornadoes and hurricanes and storms as acts of God. I would disagree. Who do we blame when there's a horrible traffic accident? And even though somebody else may have been at fault, we ask questions like, God, why didn't you prevent this? Where were your angels? Why did this have to happen? What does a parent do when they have a child born with a serious birth defect? What do you do when there's an assault or a rape and you want to say, God, where were you? And one of the most difficult things at all is a parent that's burying a young child. It is so natural and so easy to blame God. My name is Dan Southerland. I'm one of the pastors here at Westside. If you're joining us online, thank you for being with us today. Up at Speedway, glad you're on board. Here at Lenexa, grab your notes. We're in week 2 of a series called Choosing Forgiveness, because forgiveness is a choice. And if you and I are going to restore peace with God in those moments where we feel like He's let us down, in those moments where we feel betrayed, in those moments where we blame Him, we're going to have to choose to forgive God. Not because He's done anything wrong, but because we have blamed Him for what's happening in our lives. Here's today's big idea. Would you write it in? First love heals our image of God. Now let me stop right there. There's a whole other teaching we'll do on image of God. We'll try to work that in sometime soon. But you get your primary image of God from your parents and your growing up experiences. So if you had parents that were not very emotionally involved, you may tend to think of God as not caring or not having much concern about what's going on. If you grew up with parents that were really rigid and really rules-oriented, your approach to God may be the same. If you grew up with an angry parent, it's easy for you to decide that we have an angry God. If you grew up with an abusive parent or a neglectful parent, we project much of what happens to us in childhood onto our images of God. Now, the good news is that first love will heal our image of God. But here's what we're going to focus on today. We must stop blaming God and allow His forgiveness to flow through us. Everyone in this room, everyone watching on the internet today, you've had some moment in life where you've blamed God. Some moment in life where you've said, God, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you fix this? Why didn't you interact? Why didn't you get involved? Why didn't you prevent this? God, what's going on? Some of us have had those moments this week. It is part of life. If you were not here last week, can I give you an assignment? Rob Wegner taught the best lesson on forgiveness that I have heard in 43 years of being a Christ follower last week. The boy hit it out of the park. It was amazing. And if you weren't here, let me do just a 2-minute review of what he said, because it sets us up for this entire series. Rob drew a pathway, if you will, with a fork in the road. You have one of those in your notes. And he made the comment that hurt is inevitable. By the way, those of us who live our lives trying to avoid hurt, good luck with that. You can try to avoid it all you want. Hurt happens. Junk happens. Jesus said He would. So far, in my 61 years, He's been right. Hurt happens. But every time you're hurt, you come to a fork in the road. And you either choose bitterness, keeping score, getting even, or you choose forgiveness and grace and healing. And Rob walked us through this last week. Really well done. He talked about Cain. You know, Cain blows it, and he decides anybody that messes with me, I'm going to get even 7 times. Boy, that sounds pretty good, doesn't it? I mean, you mess with me, I'm going to hurt you back worse. You talk about me, I'm going to talk about you worse. You hurt me, I'm going to hurt you worse. And that sounds bad enough, but then his great-great-grandson Lamech comes along, and Lamech says, that's not enough, I'm going for 70 times 7. I'm going for nuclear overreaction when I'm hurt. By the way, I've been there. I have done that. The problem with this pathway is it leads to bitterness. You don't forgive, a piece of bitterness gets in your soul. You decide to keep score, bitterness gets a foothold. You decide to get even, bitterness starts eating at you. And there are people in your family, you know some, that are trapped in bitterness. Heck, you may be the person that's trapped in bitterness because you pursued your hurt and kept score and tried to get even and have not forgiven. The good news is there's a better road. On the other side, this 7 to 70 times thing sound familiar? Rob pointed out to us that Peter said, hey, let's forgive 7 times. Now, by the way, Peter was kind of having a braggadocio moment when he said that. He came to Jesus. The saying in Jesus' day was, if somebody hurts you, forgive them. That's where turn the other cheek comes from. Jesus took that popular saying of his day, spoke it truth for us. The rabbis of Jesus' day had made it bigger. They had said, we'll forgive somebody 3 times. The 4th time you can get even. Peter basically comes in with his thumb stuck in his overalls going, I've got this figured out, Jesus. I'm going to forgive somebody 7 times. Pretty cool, huh? And Jesus says, Peter, it's not about forgiving them 7 times and smacking them on number 8. It's about 70 times 7. It's about a lifestyle of forgiveness. It's about every time you're hurt, especially when you're hurt by the same person over and over and over again, you have to choose forgiveness. This leads to freedom. This leads to forgiveness. That fork in the road happens every time you're hurt. Somebody hurts you in business, you've got a decision to make about the fork in the road. Somebody hurts you in your family, you've got a decision to make. Every time we're hurt, we choose one or the other. Now, here's the problem. There's an addition for what we're going to talk about today. If you stay on this one long enough, you end up blaming God. Because that's where bitterness will take you. You start living with a fist in your spirit. God, why did you allow that to happen to me as a kid? Why haven't you fixed my marriage? Why did you give me this teenager? Why do I have these troubles at work? Why is this happening to me? Do you hear the fist that grows in our spirit? Now, can God handle our complaint? Absolutely. We're going to talk about that today. But does he want us to live like this? No, because the other path leads us to trusting God. I'd rather live there. The purpose of hurt is to give us an opportunity to learn to trust God. That's why James says, count it as joy when you have hurts and troubles and trials and struggles, because the testing of your faith will make you stronger, make you more mature, teach you to trust God even more. So we're going to look at this choice today, and we're going to talk about forgiving God. Our character today is Habakkuk. I love that name. Somebody please name your kid Habakkuk. I think that's a cool name. By the way, when I made the first outline, I spelled the name Habakkuk 3 different ways because I believe it's a narrow mind that can only spell a word one way. I truly believe that, but I think we got it right in here. Habakkuk's an Old Testament pastor, Old Testament prophet. He happens to be the main guy in Jerusalem in a very difficult time. Let me describe this for you because the historical background makes this story make sense. It is 600 years before Christ. For the last 400 years, Jerusalem has had mostly peace. They've had a walled city that has kept their enemies out. They've had a great temple. But over those 400 years, their commitment to God has slowly waned. They've slowly moved away from trusting God toward being bitter toward God, toward blaming God. They've developed a complaining way of doing life. And in 600 AD, the city is captured for the first time in its 400-year history by an outside power. The Syrians come to town, and in a 1.5-year siege, they take the city. They kidnap the young, good-looking kids and take them off into slave labor. They rape who they choose to rape. They steal who they choose to steal from. They leave the walls and the temple intact, but they tell the Jews, we'll be back. And when we come back, we're going to finish the job. Habakkuk's the pastor while all that's happening. Wouldn't that be fun? And in that background, he voices these complaints in Habakkuk chapter 1. Number 1, he says, God, you're not listening. God, you're not listening. Have you ever told God that? I have. I've said, hey, God, are you listening? Because you don't seem to be answering. Have you ever had moments where it feels like your prayers are not leaving the room? I mean, you're praying them, but you can't tell they're getting through at all. I mean, the reality is we don't think God's listening. We certainly don't think he's doing what we want him to do. Listen to what Habakkuk writes. By the way, Habakkuk spends a whole chapter complaining to God. So it is biblical to voice your complaints, just not biblical to stay in that mode. How long, Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? If you have raised a rebellious teenager, you've had moments where you think God's not listening. If you've been through difficult job circumstances, you've had moments where you wonder if God is listening. If you've been through health challenges like the ones that I've been through, you got moments where you're going, seriously, God? We need another round of this? Really? We're going to go do this deal again? Are you listening? It is human nature to question whether or not God is listening. Turn to your neighbor and say, you don't listen to me. Sometimes I wonder if God does. Tell him. You don't listen? Not real sure sometimes about God. The second complaint that Habakkuk voices is, God, you're not acting. You're not acting. This one is a bigger complaint. And by the way, this is one I struggle with. He says, how long, Lord, will I cry out to you violence, but you do not save? He's watched kids be kidnapped. He's watched women being raped. He's watched his city falling apart. He's crying out to God, and God's not intervening. God's not acting. Now, by the way, this is really where the complaining starts in a major way. Because we not only want to pray, we want to tell God what to do. You ever done this? God, if you don't fix this kid, I'm going to kill him. Pray that prayer. Some of you have prayed, God, you don't fix my spouse, I'm going to kill them. It's a struggle. We want God to act, and we have very specific things that we want him to do. And there are moments in life where our complaint is, God, where are you? You're not acting. There's a crisis here, God. You're not intervening. And the third one is even worse. God, you're not fixing. You're not fixing. We not only want him to hear us, we not only want him to act, we'd like to tell him exactly what to fix and how to fix it. Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and conflict abounds. Write this in. Habakkuk feels betrayed. And he's blaming God. He feels betrayed. He's been praying, God doesn't seem to be listening. He's been praying, God doesn't seem to be acting. He's been praying, God does not seem to be fixing. Now, this is a really important theological point, so let's grab this, okay? We do not need to forgive God for the wrong he has done because he has done no wrong. We cannot talk about forgiving God because he's blown it. He's done something to us that was out of line. That is not God. We do need to forgive God because we perceive he has wronged us and we blame him and feel betrayed by him. And the only way to quit blaming God is to back up and say, wait a minute, God, I trust you. Wait a minute, God, I choose not to blame you. God, I've been going down that bitterness blame path. I'm getting off that path. I'm going to go down the forgiveness trust path because I want to be a child that trusts you, not one that blames you. I want to be a child that enjoys you, not one that has a fist in their spirit toward you. Everybody in this room has felt wronged by God at some point. And we've all had a tendency to blame God at some point. Now, I love the fact that Habakkuk takes a whole chapter to voice his complaints. You're not listening, you're not acting, you're not fixing. But I love even more that in the second chapter, he says, okay, I'm going to be quiet and listen for what God wants to respond. So how does God answer Habakkuk? How would he answer us? Write these three things in. Number one, he says it's okay to voice your complaint to God. I mean, the first thing God says is, Habakkuk, thank you for telling me what's going on. It's okay for you to tell me what you think and what you feel. It's okay. All of chapter 1 of Habakkuk is a complaint. Now, this is not in your notes. It should be. Would you write this in? Complaints go direct. Complaints go direct. Wow, if there's a relationship principle I could teach people, I would grab this one. We tend to complain about our husband or wife to everybody else and don't talk to them. That doesn't fix anything. Or we complain about our kids to all our friends and we don't talk with them. Or we complain at work about our boss to other employees. That's just dumb. Do you not think that's going to get to the boss? Hello. But we do this with God. I have people come in and say, I am mad at God. He's done this and this and this and this. And I say, great, have you talked to him? Nope, I'm too mad to talk to him. You're not going to get over it till you talk to him. He's big enough to handle your complaint. Survey time. Do you think God knows when you're upset with him? I do. Do you think you're hiding it from him when you don't voice it? I don't. So God and I have a deal. When I'm upset, I tell him. Happens fairly often. And he's pretty good at telling me when he's upset with me. That happens fairly often. It's an openness to voice our complaints. Now listen closely. It's okay to voice your complaints. It's not okay to live there. All right? It's not okay to live there. That is not an okay thing. I remember a time 3 or 4 years ago when Mary and I were going through a tough stretch in our marriage. By the way, a tough stretch in marriage is called normal for anybody that's been married more than a week. And those of you that say you've never had a tough stretch, save your breath. I'll look you in the eye and say you're lying. In Jesus' name. We've all had tough stretches, and Mary and I were going through a tough stretch. It had been going on for a couple of years, and we just had something we were stuck on and weren't getting by. We had talked about it. That had not seemed to help. You know, I always think if I tell her what she needs to do, she'll just fix it and everything will be great. That's bright. So I just began for a season of time to complain about it to God. Now, it's okay to voice your complaints to God. It's not okay to get stuck there. And it got to the point where my daily time with God was less about listening to him and more about complaining about my wife. I did that for several months. And I've told you guys this story before. One evening I was sitting on my back porch. I have 2 places where I have my time with God. If it's nice, I do it on the back deck. And if it's not nice, I do it in the garage with a heat lamp on. And I'm on the back porch. It's a great night. And I have spent 20 minutes complaining to God about my wife. I mean, I am just done. And I've been doing this for months. And right toward the end of my complaint, I hear this crow caw in the neighbor's tree across my yard. Now, I'm a bit of a bird enthusiast, pay a little bit of attention to that stuff. Crows have the worst sound of all of birds. Caw! Caw! I mean, it's aggravating. And they repeat it every 5 or 6 seconds. Caw! Caw! I wanted to shoot the dang bird. Just kept going. Now, it had my curiosity because I pay enough attention to birds to know that while blackbirds are native to the eastern part of Kansas, crows are not. Crows are a western Kansas bird. And I'm just aggravated this crow's here. And I'm aggravated that he's interrupting my complaint time. And finally, I just said, God, you've got to change my wife. And could you please silence that crow? And this quick, God whispers into my spirit, that's exactly what your complaint sounds like to me. Move on. Move on. Is it okay to voice your complaint to God? Yes. Is it okay for it to become your lifestyle? No! Jesus didn't die for us to be bitter complainers. He didn't die for us to be unhappy whiners. Voice it for a season, You bet. Live there, move on. Caw, caw. Every time I start complaining now, I hear that stupid bird. The point is that you voice your complaint to God. You go direct to him. Direct to him. Number 2, you wait for God's answer. This is hard. You wait for God's answer. Habakkuk says, okay, I voiced my complaint. Now I'm going to stand at my watch, station myself on the ramparts. That's a reference to the wall around the city. I'm going to look to see what God will say to me and what answer I'm to give about this complaint. Okay, God, I have voiced it. Now I'm going to wait for you to act. I'm going to wait to see what your answer is. Waiting is hard. It is required. Hey, guys, one of the images we have of God that's wrong is that he's a big slot machine in the sky. A big vending machine. We put the money in, we pull the crank, and we hit the jackpot. Or we put the money in, we make our choice in the vending machine, and God spits the answer out below that we want. He does not do that. And he will teach us patience by letting us wait. And sometimes I don't understand why he answers some prayers in some ways and some prayers in others. I have shared this story with you before, but it has made such a foundational difference in my life. This happened 30 years ago. It's been speaking to me for 30 years. When I was in college, I started a church for college kids. That was fun. You know, you don't have to be real bright to lead a college kid, just maybe a minute brighter than they are. That was kind of fun. And then I worked with teenagers for years because, you know, you're a little bit brighter than a teenager, you can stay ahead of them. And then God said, it's time for you to pastor adults. I kind of drug into that, but I did and went to pastor this little church. They had a tradition that on the first Sunday of every month, they prayed for anybody who needed healing. Now, I was a Baptist boy that had never prayed in a public service for somebody to be healed. That was just kind of beyond my experience. But they said, hey, we got all these people coming this week, and you need to lead the prayer. So I said, okay. That Sunday, we had parents bring 3 very sick 4-year-olds. The coincidence of this is crazy to me. All 3 kids were 4 years old, down front to be prayed for. I'm supposed to pray for them in front of the congregation. First kid has a brain tumor the size of a grapefruit. That's a big tumor in a 4-year-old. It's literally pushing against her brain in such a way that the headache pressure is killing her. She's going to have surgery the following Tuesday. The University of Miami Medical Center has already done the CAT scans and the x-rays, and they have said, we don't really think we can fix this, but it's going to kill her if we don't try. Second 4-year-old was carried in. By the way, the first 4-year-old looked totally okay, just hurting with his headache. Second 4-year-old had leukemia. His parents carried him in. He'd been given 6 weeks to live. They'd done everything they could do. Third 4-year-old was hydrocephalic, born with no brain, just a brain stem and water in the place where the brain should be. She could not respond. She could not talk. She's on a breathing tube. She's on a feeding tube. She's 4 years old. She's already lived 4 years longer than anybody said she would. Here's Baptist boy, never prayed for anybody to be healed. And these 3 4-year-olds, and by the way, my 4-year-old daughter, Dana, is in the room too. So we prayed. And we waited. On Tuesday of that week, the 4-year-old with a brain tumor went into surgery, and the brain scan that showed, an x-ray that showed a tumor the size of a grapefruit on Friday, they could not find a tumor of any kind. Yeah, I agree. I'm going, wow, this stuff works. By the way, she now is a 30-year-old with 4-year-old kids. Been healthy ever since. The 4-year-old that had leukemia died 6 weeks later. And the 4-year-old with water in her brain lived another 7 years, became the darling of the church, and her parents modeled godly parenting for all of us. I do not understand the story I just told you. I used to think God only answered one of those prayers. No. Oh no, he answered all three. He took a baby home to heaven that does not suffer anymore. He took a child home at 11 years old that is the darling of heaven now, just like she was the darling of our church. And he's got a story that's still being told from the 4-year-old that he healed. You have to wait. You don't know what God's going to do. You don't know how he's going to do it. Thirdly, you voice your complaint to God, that's first. You wait for God's answer, that's second. Third, you live by faith until the answer comes. I don't like this. I don't like this. But in the 4th verse of Habakkuk 2, he says, the righteous person will live by faith. You say, Habakkuk, yeah, things are bad. Habakkuk, yeah, your city's been destroyed. They're going to come back. They're threatening to kill off the rest of you. Things are tough. Live by faith. Live by faith. In the New Testament, it says it this way: we live by faith, not by sight. Not by sight. You see, the reason we blame God many times is because we think he's not listening, we think he is not acting, we think he's not fixing. Translation, he's not doing what we want him to do. Wow, that's because he's God and we're not. He's God and we're not. And we're either going to blame him and walk down one path, or we are going to trust him and walk down the other. There are no other choices. So next time you're hurt, next time you want to blame God, pause for a moment and say, I'm making a choice here. Which way do I want to go? I want to be bitter or I want to be better? I want to blame God or I want to trust him? I want to get a critical judgmental spirit or I want to experience grace and forgiveness? Those are my choices. Got to finish telling a couple of stories. Back to Habakkuk, 600 AD. The city's destroyed, part of its population is taken away, kidnapped. 13 years later, the Syrians come back. This time they finish the job. They destroy the walls, they destroy the temple. They take every healthy man, woman, and child into captivity as slaves. The only people they left in Jerusalem were the old and the sick. And God told Habakkuk before it happened, hey, my people have walked away from me for 400 years, but I'm going to redeem them. They're going to go into captivity. They're going to spend 2 generations there. And 70 years later, when their kids, when the grandkids of this group have come up and start crying out to me and start trusting me, I'm going to bring them back to Jerusalem and we're going to rebuild this city. I am not forsaking my people, but they've walked away from me for a time. And I have to let them experience the consequences of walking away. All of that comes to pass. The struggle Mary and I were having 3 years ago is now one of the strongest points in our marriage. I'd love to tell you it's because God fixed her. Just because after all my complaining about, Lord, this woman you've given me, she's the problem. God said, look a little deeper. The problem was me. I'm not sure I'm going to share that when she's here at 11. Write this in as we wrap this up. There are moments or seasons of feeling betrayed by God that are normal. It is normal to say, God, are you listening? Are you acting? Are you fixing? It's normal to feel betrayed. It's normal to have moments where you blame God. However, getting in that mode and staying there, whoa, we do not want to live there. Go there once in a while, normal. Live there, path to bitterness. We don't want to go. We must choose trust rather than give in to our anger. If I blame God, I'm basically telling him, I'm brighter than you, so I'm telling you where you've blown it. And when I trust God, I'm saying, I am dumb compared to you. I trust you to be at work. I trust you to work this out. We walk by faith rather than by feeling. Church, please hear that. Is it normal to have moments where you walk by feeling? Sure. Let's not live there. I want to end with this thing that Jesus said to us in John 16 that's given me a lot of comfort over the years. Jesus is about to be crucified the next day, about to spend his last 40 days here on earth and then go to heaven. He knows it's one of his last times to talk to his guys. So he says, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble. Now, can I stop and say that in my 61 years, that part of the verse is true? If you are living life trying to avoid trouble, good luck. Jesus said it's coming. It is always dangerous to try to do something Jesus said you can't do. We cannot avoid trouble. But listen to what he says. But take heart, I have overcome the world. Voice your complaint. Wait for God to answer. Live by faith till he does. We're going to have prayer partners down front today. It's an important day for them to be here. Here's why. Some of you are blaming God for stuff going on in your life right now. You need to come pray with somebody. Some of you have been blaming God for something that's been going on for years. You're walking down that road to bitterness. You don't want to live there. Come pray with someone. And I want to remind you that you want to be here next week. It's rare for me to say this, but next Sunday will be one of the highlights of our year here at Westside. Doug Fields is one of the most gifted communicators in America today. He is funny. He sticks you with the truth. He gets you laughing. He sticks you with another truth. He will absolutely fillet us all next week and make us enjoy it in the process. He's amazing. So he's going to come and talk to us about forgiving family. You can't do a series on forgiveness without talking about forgiving family, because nobody hurts us as often and as deeply as family. And if we don't learn how to forgive them, we live in bitterness towards our family. That marriage date night is happening next Sunday night. That information is in your bulletin as well. Here's the blessing as we go today. May we all decide that we will not live in bitterness and hurt. And may Jesus free us to live in forgiveness and trust. All God's people said. Love you guys. See ya.